Okay, it's 5:05, so we're going to get started. Good evening and welcome to the Technical Methods Workshop for the Central Springs East Coast Water Supply Planning Effort. The Central Springs East Coast, or CSEC as we like to call it, is one of 3 planning regions in the St. Johns River Water Management District. It includes all or part of 6 counties: Marion, Lake, Volusia, Brevard, Indian River, and Okeechobee. The purpose of this workshop is to discuss the technical data and tools utilized to develop the draft water supply plan for the CSEC planning region. This workshop is being recorded and will be posted online for future viewing opportunities. Okay, here's the agenda for tonight's workshop. You will notice a question and answer period at the conclusion of the presentations. We ask that you please hold your questions until this time. I want to take this time to welcome our workshop attendees, those attending in person and via the webinar. My name is Joy Kochjohn, and I am the Regional Water Supply Planning Coordinator for the Central Springs East Coast Planning Region. Also speaking today will be J.C. Crosby, a Senior Water Use Analyst with Water Supply Planning, Lainey Cisco, a Hydrologist in the Groundwater Modeling Group, and Late Luzon, the Technical Program Manager for the MFLs program. I would like to also introduce our webinar moderator, Deirdre Irwin, who is also the district's Water Conservation Coordinator, and would also like to thank all the other district staff that are here providing assistance this evening. For those of you attending via the GoToWebinar, you can submit your questions anytime using the questions panel shown on the screen. Please be sure to provide your name and who you are representing along with your question. Deirdre will read the submitted questions aloud during the question and answer period. Again, this workshop is being recorded and will be posted online within the next couple of days. Right now, I will turn it over to JC, who will talk about the population, how the population and water demand projections are developed.
Thank you, Joy. Good evening, everyone. I am J.C. Crosby with the Bureau of Water Supply Planning. During this presentation, I will give a brief overview of the methods used to develop the demand projections for the Central Springs East Coast Regional Water Supply Plan. The detailed methodologies can all be found in Appendix B to the CSEC plan. For the categories of public supply and domestic self-supply water use, we start by developing population projections. For these projections, the district uses a parcel-based model that distributes the population growth from published Bieber medium projections. Bieber is the University of Florida's Bureau of Economic and Business Research. Every year, Bieber publishes population projections by county for the state of Florida, and the water management districts are required by legislation to consider these projections for water supply planning. Our parcel-based model distributes population projections spatially and then aggregates the total population within each public supply service area boundary. This distribution is done for all utilities within the district, regardless of the permitted threshold. As a reminder, the public supply category typically consists of public or private utilities that have a permit to withdraw equal to or greater than 100,000 gallons per day. The domestic self-supply category consists of individual residences that have their own private well. For planning purposes, the domestic self-supply category also includes small public supply systems that withdraw less than 100,000 gallons per day. Once we have the population estimates, in order to project the water demand, the district calculates average per capita rates. The average per capita represents how much water each person uses each day, and it's calculated by dividing the water use by the population. For the CSEC Regional Water Supply Plan, we used an average of 2011 to 2015 historical pumping. For each public supply utility, regardless of the threshold, the district calculates a utility-specific gross per capita. This per capita includes all water use subtypes within the utility. Countywide residential per capita, which includes use by residential homes, is used for the domestic self-supply category. For agricultural projections, the district directly uses projections developed for the Florida Department of Agricultural and Consumer Services. These are published in their yearly Florida Statewide Agricultural Irrigation Demand Report. We call it FSED. For the CSEC Regional Water Supply Plan, FSED version 4 was used. For the commercial, industrial, institutional, and mining dewatering categories, we develop water demand projections by multiplying the historic per capita and average of the years 2011 to 2015 by the increase in population. Landscape, recreation, and aesthetic is calculated in the same manner. For power generation, each plant is required to submit a 10-year horizon site plan to the Public Service Commission. They do this each year. This plan outlines the megawatt usage per customer. Using the site plan's estimate, our own population projections, and the average historic water use, we can do a simple multiplication to calculate the future demand for each power generation facility. I'd like to note that the district also solicits feedback on the results of this methodology from each of our power generation facilities. Shifting to water conservation, for public supply and domestic self-supply, 2 water conservation scenarios were developed. For scenario 1, we applied a % reduction in water use based on the implementation of best management practices, BMPs. These have measurable water savings, and this is the same strategy detailed in the 2015 Central Florida Water Initiative Plan. For scenario 2, for public supply and domestic self-supply, we calculated the average 2011 to 2015 gross per capita within each sub-region. We applied this per capita to any utility that exceeded the average and then recalculated the demand. The corresponding % reduction for public supply in each county was then applied to the DSS. Similar to scenario 1, for all of the other non-agricultural use types, we developed estimates of conservation potential based on the following BMPs. So these are some of the ones that were listed on the slide before. We have shower heads, faucets, toilets, urinals, irrigation audits, soil moisture sensors, pre-rinse spray valves, and we also do site-specific commercial, industrial, and institutional audits. For the agricultural water conservation, the district uses the estimates detailed in the FSED product. For reclaimed water, the district created 2 projection scenarios. First, the current flow available for future water use was estimated. For scenario 1, we apply the Florida Department of Environmental Protection reuse goal of 75% to existing flows that are not already being utilized beneficially. For scenario 2, we apply the 2015% beneficial reuse by facility to the existing flows not already utilized beneficially. Then for future reclaimed flows, the scenarios are the same as what was developed for the historical flows. The future flows incorporate our population projections based on the wastewater facility service area boundary aggregated from our parcel-based model. We assume new sewer flows of 85 gallons per capita, which accounts for indoor residential use and new commercial growth. Thank you for your time. Next up is Lainey Cisco with a presentation on groundwater modeling.
Good evening. My name is Lainey Cisco, and I'm a hydrologist in the Groundwater Modeling section within the Bureau of Watershed Management Modeling. Today, I will be discussing the groundwater flow models utilized in support of the CSEC Regional Water Supply Plan. So what are groundwater flow models? They're mathematical representations of groundwater flow through an aquifer system. Groundwater flow models simulate flow by means of a governing equation that represents the physical processes of the system. At the district, we use ModFlow, a computer code developed by the USGS, to solve for groundwater flow numerically. Numerical groundwater flow models are more versatile and allow for more complexity to be represented in the flow system. Groundwater flow models are important tools here at the district that we use to understand water supply potential of aquifers and predict how groundwater levels and flows will respond to changes in groundwater withdrawals. Therefore, they have applications in our water supply planning, MFL, and permitting programs here at the district. Within the CSEC regional water supply planning area shown on the map on the right, outlined by the solid black line, there are 3 groundwater flow models that were utilized to complete water resource assessments within different subregions. The Volusia model, noted by the dashed red box showing the model grid extent, is a steady-state groundwater flow model that covers the extent of Volusia County. The Northern District's Model Version 5, or NDM-V5, developed jointly by St. John's and Southwest Florida Water Management Districts, is a transient groundwater flow model that covers the portions of Marion and Northern Lake County within the planning region. The East Central Florida Transient Expanded Model, or ECFTX, outlined in the map by a dashed blue line, is a transient groundwater flow model that was developed jointly with Southwest Florida and South Florida Water Management Districts that covers the southern portion of the planning region, including Brevard, Indian River, and a small portion of Okeechobee County. The major aquifer systems represented in the CSEC planning region are represented in the conceptual diagrams shown on this slide. They include the superficial aquifer system, an unconfined aquifer that consists of mostly unconsolidated sands. The Floridan aquifer system is a carbonate aquifer system made up of primarily limestone that is found beneath all of Florida and portions of Alabama, Georgia, and South Carolina. It also extends into the Gulf of Mexico and the Atlantic Ocean. The Floridan aquifer system is the major source of drinking water in the state of Florida, and where it is confined, the intermediate confining unit is present, but where it is absent, the Floridan aquifer system is unconfined. In these locations, limestone is at or near the surface, and there's generally a greater prevalence of springs and sinkhole features in these areas. As you can see by the flow diagram on the left, the groundwater system is primarily recharged through direct precipitation, and discharge can occur both naturally to our springs and surface water bodies or at pumping wells. In a groundwater flow model, a layer represents a hydrostratigraphic unit, which are geologic formations with similar hydrologic characteristics or properties, such as permeability or hydraulic conductivity. The model layering scheme used for the 3 groundwater flow models I previously discussed are listed in each table. The Volusia model on the far left is what we call a quasi-3-dimensional model. It means that groundwater flow through the confining units is assumed to be vertical and was not explicitly simulated in the model. Flow through the aquifer layers through the confining unit is simulated using a vertical leakage term. The NDM-V5 and ECFTX models are fully 3-dimensional groundwater flow models. These models also cover a larger regional extent with greater heterogeneity in the subsurface. Although the models differ in the number of layers assigned to each hydrostratigraphic unit, each model includes the major aquifer systems and confining units present in the CSEC planning region within each of the model boundaries. Additional model documentation for these groundwater flow models can be accessed on the CSEC planning region website. There are numerous data required to develop a groundwater flow model. These data are used to conceptualize the model, define the model boundary conditions, or sources and sinks of water in the model, and to also calibrate the model. Aquifer and confining unit properties, such as hydraulic conductivity and storage properties, are generally inferred from aquifer or pumping test data. We also rely on borehole data, including geophysical data or lithologic data, for mapping of hydrogeologic units and their thicknesses. Evapotranspiration is a term that represents the combination of evaporation of water and transpiration from plants. Higher evapotranspiration rates reduce the amount of water available for recharge to the water table. We also rely on water level data from monitoring wells, as well as measurements of flows from springs and rivers. These are important data sets used for setting up our boundary conditions in the model and calibrating the model. Groundwater pumping is a major data set used in our models, and it includes reported or estimated pumping rates from agricultural, public supply, domestic self-supply, commercial, and landscape or recreational water uses. In a groundwater model, the major model inflows are recharge, irrigation applied at land surface, groundwater pumping in the form of injection wells or ribs, as well as surface water losses, so surface water bodies that discharge directly to the groundwater flow system. We also get inflows into our model from our lateral boundaries. Major model outflows include direct discharge of groundwater through spring flow, evapotranspiration, groundwater withdrawals, surface water discharge, and again, flows that can exit our model through our external model boundaries. Using the water balance equation, the difference between the inflows and outflows in the system are equal to the change in storage. In the case of groundwater flow systems, these changes in storage are manifested as changes in aquifer water level. The map on the right is an example model output that shows the predicted changes in aquifer levels due to changes in groundwater pumping. The drawdown or rebound in aquifer level is used to evaluate the impact from pumping spatially. This information is extracted from groundwater flow models for the purpose of water resource evaluations. And with that, I will conclude this section on groundwater modeling and pass it on to Joy Kochjan, who will discuss in further detail about water resource evaluations.
Thank you, Lainey. Again, this is Joy Kochjan. In water supply planning, we incorporate projected water demand that JC discussed into groundwater models, which Lainey discussed, to predict potential impacts to the water resources of the region. For the CSEC planning region, we evaluated potential impacts to water bodies with minimum flows and levels, or MFLs, groundwater quality changes, and potential change to wetland function. One of the assumptions in performing the water resource evaluation is that all water needed to meet projected demand will come from existing sources, which is mostly groundwater. The evaluation predicts the location and magnitude of impacts associated with future groundwater withdrawals. In areas where unacceptable impacts are predicted to occur, demands must be reduced or projects implemented, such as development of alternative water sources, to avoid the impacts. Right now, I'll turn it over to Nate, who will be discussing minimum flows and levels.
Thank you, Joy. Like Joy said, I'm Nate Mouzon. I'm the Minimum Flows and Levels, or MFLs for short, Technical Program Manager, and I will walk you through the MFLs process. Minimum flows and levels are a statutory requirement that protect priority water bodies by setting limits to surface or groundwater withdrawal. MFLs define the limit at which further withdrawals would be significantly harmful to the water resources or ecology of the area. MFLs represent an amount of water, a volume, that defines the balance between the amount of water necessary for the environment and other beneficial uses and water needed for consumptive uses. MFLs are an important tool for regulatory and water supply planning when assessing the effects of current and future pumping on non-consumptive uses. The MFLs process is divided into two primary but interrelated components. First, we have the MFLs determination, where we determine the environmental criteria that are the most relevant to the water body and most sensitive to pumping. The minimum hydrology, or the amount of water over the long term needed to protect these criteria, is called the MFLs condition. Next, we assess the MFLs criteria. This involves determining the current impacted hydrologic regime, which we call the current pumping condition. and then comparing it to the MFL's condition to see if there is available water, which we term freeboard, or if recovery of water is necessary, terms deficit. I'll talk more about the assessment in a minute. For many of our systems, we determine hydrologic events, which include a magnitude, duration, and return interval. We set these ecologically relevant events because the system's hydrology, represented here by this hydrograph, can be viewed as a series of flooding events of varying duration and frequency, the part of the graph highlighted in blue, and a series of drying events of varying duration and frequency, both in reference to a critical or target elevation or flow, represented by the dashed line running through the center. To set this target elevation, we collect ecological data in and around the water body. Data collected along transects allow us to characterize and survey vegetation and soils along an elevation gradient. Here's an example of what that transect profile may look like. The transects run from the upland out into open water, allowing us to distinguish the boundaries of distinct vegetation communities, each with varying hydrologic requirements. The elevation change also allows us to mark important soil characteristics that follow this moisture gradient. Each vegetation community or soil type can be the basis for a specific target elevation. To protect the natural regime of many target elevations, we typically try to establish multiple event-based levels, from high flooding events to average and low drying events. By setting multiple levels when we can, we protect different ecological functions and values and other beneficial human use values. Here are some examples of event-based metrics from the recent Sylvan Lake MFLs. For this system, we set a frequent high event to protect the transitional shrub communities and their associated fish and wildlife habitat. We set a minimum average to protect organic soils and a frequent low to protect shallow and deep marsh habitats around the lake. Here we can see the various components of our event-based metrics, each having a magnitude, and in this case a water level, a duration, and a return interval. The next step in the process is the MFL's assessment. This involves using surface and groundwater models, water use data, and conducting numerous analyses to determine a current impacted hydrologic regime, what we call the current pumping condition. After, we compare this current pumping condition to the MFL's condition to determine if there is water available. To show this graphically, the dashed blue line represents a hypothetical MFL's condition. And again, this is a good time to reiterate that MFLs define a volume of water available over the long term. They are not simply single levels or flows. The MFL's condition defines the amount of water needed to sustain the environment and other non-consumptive human beneficial uses. We compare this to the current pumping condition, the solid blue line here, which is the current impacted hydrologic regime. If the current pumping condition hydrograph is greater than the MFL's condition hydrograph, there is water available for withdrawal, what we term freeboard or sustainable yield. But if the current pumping line is below the MFL's condition line, this is the amount of water that would need to be recovered. This flowchart illustrates the steps taken to develop the groundwater and surface water models used to assess the MFL's condition for a water body. I'll walk through these steps from estimating groundwater pumping impact, developing no pumping and current pumping upper fluid and aquifer levels, using those groundwater levels to develop no and current pumping surface water conditions, and ultimately using both models to assess the MFL's condition. The first step in developing a current pumping time series is to develop a pre-withdrawal condition, what we call the no pumping condition. This is done by adding the estimated impact from a historical pumping to the observed record. The graph on the upper left shows an estimate of water use over time. The graph in the upper right shows the relationship between pumping and drawdown in the aquifer, and we use groundwater models to do this. We then combine these data to create something like the graph in the middle, which shows drawdown in the aquifer over time. The next step involves adding the impact over time to the observed upper fluid and aquifer data. This yields the no pumping condition. After that, we take an estimate of our current impact, either from 1 year or a 5-year average, and reduce the entire time series by that amount. This yields the current pumping condition. This aquifer time series represents both the variability due to climate and also the reduction due to current pumping. After we have the current pumping condition for the aquifer, we then use this as a boundary condition in our surface water model to create a current pumping lake level or river flow time series. The frequency of an ecological event under current impact conditions can then be compared to the recommended MFL frequency for that event, or the MFL's condition. We do this for event-based metrics using frequency analysis, where we can use the surface water models to iteratively take away water from the system if the MFL is being met, or add water back to the system if the MFL is not being met. Using models to generate these long-term simulations is a very powerful tool that allows us to assess whether an MFL is being met currently and under future projections. Once our MFL status assessment is complete, we can determine if a water supply strategy is required. This flow chart describes the circumstances under which a strategy is needed. If the MFLs are already not being met under current water demands, then a recovery strategy is developed. If MFLs are currently being met but are predicted not to meet future water demands, a prevention strategy is developed. If the MFLs are met now and in the future, no action is required.
Okay, thanks, Nate. This is Joy Kochjohn again, and I just wanted to let you know how we take what Nate and his group does with the MFLs and how we're able to use those in the water supply plans. So for the majority of MFLs in the CSEC planning area, the MFL status that Nate discussed was associated with a time frame that didn't necessarily line up with the CSEC planning period, which consists of a base year of 2015 and a 2040 planning horizon. So in order to update the current status for the CSEC plan, all MFL, freeboard, or deficit values had to be brought forward or back in a couple cases to the 2015 base year. This was done by using groundwater models to calculate the change in aquifer level or spring flow from the MFL condition to 2015, and then by applying that change to the original MFL freeboard or deficit. This exercise resulted in updated current statuses for the MFLs within the CSEC plan. To determine the MFL status at the 2040 planning horizon, a similar exercise was performed. The groundwater models were utilized to predict the change in level or flow from 2015 to 2040, and that change was applied to the 2015 freeboard or deficit value to get a future MFL status at the planning horizon. And now I'd like to bring JC up again to talk about the groundwater quality analysis.
Thank you, Joy. Again, I'm JC Crosby, Senior Water Use Analyst for the Bureau of Water Supply Planning, and this will be a brief presentation on the methods used for assessing water quality. For CSEC, the district analyzed chloride data from 89 district observation well network wells located in the Upper Floridan Aquifer and 300 permitted wells, including agricultural and public supply wells in the Upper Floridan or superficial aquifers. The picture on the right shows the spatial location of each of these wells within the planning region boundary. For each well, chloride levels were gathered periodically. This graph shows an example of what that time series data could look like. The period of record shown here is from 2016 to 2021. The median chloride level is represented by the horizontal blue line at 31.3 milligrams per liter. Questions we might ask of this data include, 1, are the chloride levels significantly increasing? And 2, if they are, how fast are they increasing? And what's the predicted chloride concentration in year 2040? To test for a significant increasing trend in chloride concentration, we used the non-parametric Mann-Kendall test and the Thielsen trend analysis at a 95% significance level. This is a robust method for analyzing time series data since it's resistant to outliers and missing data. This method also allows us to estimate the rate of change in chloride levels with send slope estimate. Once we determine a well has a significant increasing trend, we categorize that slope into groups of high, medium, or low rates of change in chlorides. A high rate of change in chlorides is a slope of more than 3 milligrams per liter. Medium is between 1 and 3, and a low rate of change is between 0 and 1 milligrams per liter. For CSEC, wells of interest are those with a significant high or medium rate of change in chloride levels. We then extrapolate their predicted 2040 chloride concentration to determine if they are above a threshold of 250 milligrams per liter. 250 milligrams per liter is the secondary drinking water standard for chlorides. So back to the example, this well does have a significant increasing trend with a p-value of 0.01. The estimated rate of change in chlorides is low, 0.76 milligrams per liter per year. And if we were to extrapolate to 2040, it would only be at 48.3 milligrams per liter in chloride levels. So this concludes the example of water quality assessment. Thank you for your time. Joy Kochjohn will be presenting on the wetlands next.
Okay, thank you, JC. In estimating the potential for change to wetland function, we utilize the Kinzer-Minnow method for areas where the upper Floridan aquifer is confined and a modified version of the Kinzer-Minnow method for areas where the upper Floridan is unconfined. Both of the methods use the GIS-based model to conduct a matrix analysis of soil permeability, sensitivity of plant communities to dewatering, and projected superficial aquifer declines. The modified method adds depth from land surface to the potentiometric surface of the unconfined upper Floridan aquifer. Geospatial data sources that we use include soil survey layer, land use, land cover data, the unconfined upper Floridan aquifer boundary, digital elevation models, and the upper Floridan aquifer potentiometric surface. So before we evaluate the potential for adverse change at the planning horizon, we determine if current conditions make an area susceptible to change. We look at soil permeability and the sensitivity of the vegetation community to drawdown. For example, highly permeable soils would dewater more quickly in response to a declining water table. Vegetation can have varying sensitivities to water table elevation. For example, freshwater marshes are very sensitive, while sand pine stands would be much less sensitive. Ultimately, wetland plant communities on permeable soils would have a high potential for harm, but is there a likelihood of harm occurring? So then we take the potential for change classification that we discussed previously and compare it to the predicted superficial aquifer level decline to determine the potential future potential for adverse change to wetlands. We then map those polygons with a medium or high potential. So here's another look at the process. You'll see we look at soil permeability and the different vegetation communities to determine areas that would be sensitive to change. Then we add in the predicted superficial aquifer drawdown to narrow down the areas based on predicted impacts. And the result is wetland acreage that could be at risk for future potential change due to superficial aquifer decline. Now, for areas where the upper Floridan aquifer is unconfined, we do apply the additional step where we compare these results with the depth from land surface to the unconfined aquifer. Okay, that concludes the technical methods workshop presentation. We are now available for your questions. I do realize that there are certain individuals that are attending via the webinar that may have difficulty answering questions and possibly even seeing or hearing the presentation. I want to let everyone know that the presentation is being recorded and it will be posted very soon to the website. So I apologize for any difficulties you're having, but we will post the webinar and I will be available for questions. You can email me. My email address is jkokjohn@sjrwmd.com. Okay, now I'll go to Deirdre and see if we have any questions from attendees from the webinar.
We do not have, we just had one question. This is from Randy Oslo.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. This question is from Randy Coslow. There is a significant lowering of the potentiometric surface forecast in the extreme northwest corner of Brevard County that extends into south central Volusia County. Could you please discuss this?
Thank you for your question, Randy. This is actually the technical methods workshop where we discuss the methodology used to develop the water supply plan. That being said, we do have 3 workshops on the water supply plan itself where we will be discussing results. So I hope that you're able to attend one of those sessions. In addition, you may always provide comments online. We do have a Central Springs East Coast website, and you can submit your public comment or questions there as well.
That is all I have at this time.
Okay, we'll give it another minute.
I have another question from Randall Braxma. How reliable do you feel your projections are?
Well, I'm going to try to answer that, Randall. I think our projections use the best available data. One of the things that is unique about developing projections is that we look at them every 5 years. So, and that's the opportunity to recalibrate essentially our best estimates using the best available tools. And while we're waiting for additional questions, I am going to just forward this on to the next slide so that I can, for those of you who can see this, this shows the upcoming water supply plan workshops. We have 3 scheduled for next week, and we purposely scheduled them throughout the planning area in different regions to make them more accessible. We have one on Monday, July 26th at the Volusia County Council Chambers. Wednesday, July 28th at the Indian River County Administration Complex, and then Thursday, July 29th at the Lake County Administration Building. Those are in-person workshops. We will not have a webinar link for those 3 workshops.
I have an additional question from Randall Braxma. Are new tools being developed that you might be able to use?
Randall, I'm assuming you're referring to projections since that was the last question that you asked. maybe not tools necessarily, but a better understanding. Well, no, better tools. Yes, I would say, I think JC discussed the population or the population projection parcel model that's been, is relatively new for developing projections. And that's something that could potentially be improved on as we learn more and have, I guess as time goes on. So yeah, definitely. I would definitely think that would occur as we learn more and as tools get more refined. Okay, I'm going to give you another minute for any other additional questions. Again, I apologize if you're having problems submitting questions, but we will definitely answer any questions we receive via email or via the webpage. And again, as soon as the video is processed, we will get it on our website for review. Okay, I don't see any other questions, so I'm going to go ahead and adjourn. Thank you for attending, and I hope that we see you at one of the upcoming workshops next week. If you have any questions, please feel free to reach out. Thank you for joining, and enjoy the rest of your evening.